Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Space Tour Live, and welcome to yet another incredible space talk. On the show tonight, we've got serial space entrepreneur Mike Lawton. Now, Mike is the former CEO and founder of multi-award-winning space technology business Oxford Space Systems. He was also the Barclays Bank UK Startup Entrepreneur of 2018. Hello, Mike. How are you doing?
That's not a great start for a tech entrepreneur, is it? Not switching his microphone on. I'll answer your question. I'm really good.
That's right. I think we can hear you now. How are you?
I'm really good, thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome to all of our viewers on Space Tour Live, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome to another Space Talk. Now, Mike, what are we going to be talking about today?
Well, I thought I'd give you a very quick overview of Oxford Space Systems and how the business actually came into being, a quick overview of some of the great technologies being developed by the team there, and talk about why they're really relevant to our modern day life, and then kind of over to you to grill me on the entrepreneurial journey and why we need the sort of space technology that we're hearing about in the news.
Perfect. Well, I'll let you set the scene for our viewers, and then I can't wait to ask you some questions.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, here is what the business looks like today, and what we're looking at is the custom premises that we built to house Oxford Space Systems at the Harwell Space Cluster in Oxfordshire. But this is the result of many, many years of hard work to get to this nice, shiny building. And most people find the story of how it all started really quite interesting. So I'll quickly tell you about that. So about 8 years ago, Oxford Space Systems just didn't exist. It was just a complete blank sheet of paper. And I just had some ideas about what I wanted to do for a space business. And by the way, my background is in technology. So my degree is in electronics. And I really didn't have that much experience at all to do with the aerospace sector. So I literally was the naive space tech entrepreneur with a head full of visions. But at the time, there was a competition being run by UK government agency Innovate UK. And the key part of the competition was you could be a pre-startup to apply for this space competition. And what they were looking for were ideas for new space businesses. So I applied to that competition with the idea of developing deployable structures on orbit, because I thought that a new generation of satellites was going to need a new generation of deployable structures, because I was looking around at the sort of things we were deploying on orbit, things like solar panels and antennas, and thinking there really isn't a lot of innovation actually taking place in that area. And that's where I was going to find my niche speciality. So I applied to this competition and won. And I won £100,000, which sounds fantastic, but it was conditional. And the condition was I had to go away and raise at least the same amount again from the private investment community, from private investors. And I had 12 months in which to do that. So the clock was ticking. I had a chance meeting actually at Harwell on campus with a venture capitalist. And his opening line to me was, when I told him about the business, he said, "Mike, I'm never going to invest in space technology because it takes way too long and costs way too much. But you know what? I'm going to walk to my next meeting. It's going to take 2 minutes to get there. So why don't you try and convince me?" And I thought, this now has to be the best ever pitch I'm going to give in my life. I've got 2 minutes to convince an investor. We get to the door of his meeting room. He turns and looks at me. I won't use the expletive that came out of his mouth, but he said, "Flip. You've now caused me a problem. This is really interesting. Can you come back tomorrow?" So I came back the following day, and really the rest is history. I managed to secure that initial investment, which then set me on the trajectory. So I ended up actually starting life in a broom cupboard, literally a broom cupboard at Harwell, where I was trying to haggle a deal on my first office. Managed to build a team quite quickly in rented rooms at Harwell. I set the team a challenge. I said, look, we've got to prove to the investment community that space can be done a lot quicker and a lot faster. So let's set ourselves a challenge of breaking a world record. Let's set the record for the fastest time for a new technology on orbit. And that's exactly what we did. And we wanted to do things a little bit differently. It wasn't just about building new antennas and new structures. We wanted to do this with materials that were brand new as well. So we actually started life developing our own proprietary materials that we then turned into the products that I'm going to show you. So the first material that we developed, if this video will kindly play for us, is, if you imagine a tape measure, a builder's tape measure, but made out of a highly flexible material, a composite material. We coiled this up and put it on a small satellite, roughly the size of a loaf of bread, called a CubeSat. And the idea was to display brand new material successfully deployed on orbit, and that would validate a lot of the technical making about this material. As you can see in the video here, this little animation, this is exactly what we did. We deployed this long boom-like structure of the spacecraft, and that validated a whole bunch of predictions we made about the material. And uniquely for this size of spacecraft, we retracted the boom back into the spacecraft to show that we had this kind of truly deployable and retractable system. And you're seeing here first ever images we took on space, on orbit. And we did set a record. So from no company to successfully developing this material and turning it into a boom structure, we did that in just over 2.5 years. And that's the fastest it's ever been done. And that was really an inflection point for the business. We really grabbed the interest of the industry. And that led to a phone call from one of the well-known builders in the UK, Airbus Space and Fence, who said, Mike, we really like what you've just done with that boom on orbit. We've got a challenge. We want to demonstrate a whole bunch of projects being developed in the UK to help remove space debris. So can we have one of your booms, and we want to deploy a target on orbit and then shoot it with a harpoon to demonstrate that potentially we can use a harpoon system to snare large chunks of debris and help clean up space. And they asked me, is it going to work? Would your boom be able to support the target we want to shoot at? And I said, I have no idea. Has anybody ever shot anything on orbit before? Let's see what happens. It was purely a very high-risk R&D experiment. And now if we play the video, you'll see exactly what happened on orbit when we shot a target for the first time. So there you are. Great, thanks. I can't talk over the video when it plays at that end. But you saw what happened there. We successfully deployed the target. A lot of vibration, because obviously we're in the vacuum of space. There's no air to damp the movement of the boom, but it stabilized really nicely. And then the harpoon launched with such force, it actually tore the end of the boom off. But we successfully penetrated the target exactly where we wanted to do. And the mission was seen as a complete success because none of those bits fragmented on orbit. So that was a really great, exciting point for us in the business. But from there, we wanted to make much more higher value systems. We demonstrated this material, but the real value lies in developing antennas for communication. And to celebrate the business expanding and moving into that new facility that I showed you, we did this. Rather than cutting a ribbon to celebrate moving into the business, we used that material that I just shown you on orbit, but we put it together in such a way it had a huge amount of stored energy, such that when we release, pull the pin out and release the system, it deploys beautifully to give us this very large parabolic antenna. And once again, huge success for that antenna. And that led to a lot of interest from a number of space companies wanting to fly that on orbit. And that's given rise to these portfolio of antennas that you see here. And that type of antenna that you saw being deployed is used for what we call synthetic aperture radar. And that's a really fancy way of saying a radar from space that can image the ground. And we use radar because it doesn't matter whether it's day or night or there's bad weather, we can get some great images from orbit, and that helps with Earth observations, land management, ship movements, basically what's going on the surface of the Earth. And we also use some really interesting techniques such as origami to make sure we can fold these structures in the smallest possible space. And if we play the next video, you'll see one of our neat structures deploying. Gosh, that was moving a lot slower than I was expecting. But the idea is, how do we fold things like antenna surfaces in the smallest possible volume, folding out creasing? So we use a lot of origami techniques to achieve that. The other types of antennas being worked on by the business, and you may have heard of this expression, the Internet of Things. So the idea of every device is connected to the internet. But if you're in really remote areas, perhaps in the desert, or on top of a mountain, or indeed, say, shipping containers being moved across the surface of the ocean, how do you know what's going on with those sensors? So using special type of Internet of Things, which radiate their signal towards space, we can actually pick up these thousands, if not millions of devices, all radiating their signals about what's going on with what they're monitoring on orbit. Now, to do that, you need special types of antennas. And once again, you can see what looks like a coiled spring out of the side of a very small satellite. Once again, they're called a CubeSat, the size of a loaf of bread. And this is revolutionizing how we track things around the planet. So these Internet of Things sensors are now currently active today, and we're picking up their signals on orbit with the sorts of antennas being developed at OSS. Now, if you want to pick up really, really weak signals, say something as weak as a key fob you would use to unlock your car, well, believe it or not, we can actually detect signals that small and that weak on orbit, but we need a much larger antenna to do that. So if we play the next video, you can see the size of antenna we developed to pick up that type of signal. So it looks a bit like a pop-up beach tent, but that's what we call a helical antenna. And that white material is a special type of cloth that's designed to withstand the space environment. And in the same way, it helps give you rigidity on a beach tent. We use exactly the same principles on orbit to give us a very structurally rigid antenna, which stows in a really small volume. The great people helping develop that technology, you can see in the photograph here. So this was taken to celebrate moving into our premises, our new facility at the Harwell campus. So I tend to make the technology sound great and attract investments, but it's really the really smart people behind the business, the great team of engineers that actually turn this into reality. So there's a very quick overview of business, some of the exciting technologies that we've developed that are currently on orbit and actually underpinning a lot of our modern lives, making internet traffic a lot faster, allowing us to track things as they move across the planet. And of course, now we're talking about mega constellations and how a next generation of internet everywhere will be delivered from space with some of the technology being developed by OSS.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike, for giving that overview. I hope it helps all of our viewers tuning in a bit more context around what Oxford Space Systems does. I'm really interested to speak to you about your entrepreneurial journey in building OSS from what you said was like yourself, an idea on a blank piece of paper, into an organization which has over 50 people in the heart of Harwell working for it today.
Yeah, certainly. I think having an idea is the easy part. To be honest, I think everybody quite often in their lives comes up with an idea and think, wouldn't it be great to build a business around that? But the real work, of course, is turning that vision into reality. And it can be a really tough journey, because you've got to convince people to come and work for you. And when you're building an engineering business, when you think about it, engineers are generally trained in the disciplines of de-risking technology. It's about, how do we make things reliable? How's this thing going to last 10, 20 years? How's this thing going to survive on orbit? So their whole ethos is about reducing risk. So to come and join a crazy entrepreneur in a journey is probably one of the craziest, riskiest career moves you can ever make. So you've got to try and get your engineering team in those early days, to embrace career risk as well as technical risk. And then even when you have convinced people to come and work for you, how the hell are you going to pay anybody until you're actually generating income and selling technology? So then you've got to have the skills of being able to get out there, convince investors to put money into your business. So you've got to bring all these pieces of the jigsaw together. So you can see why it's not for the faint of heart, and you can see why perhaps most businesses tend not to survive beyond, say, the kind of first 5 or 6 years of life. It is an incredibly dangerous path to navigate.
How would you say you have built the trust of, firstly, people who have formed these engineering teams, and then these investors? Because OSS have raised, I think, over £10 million from the private venture capitalist community. How do you build that trust?
Yeah, it's about finding out what motivates people. I think most engineers, well, they tend to be very smart people, because it's an engineering discipline. And I think most engineers perhaps sometimes are frustrated entrepreneurs themselves and like to be listened to. So the way I structured the business, certainly with co-founders or that initial team coming in, was, well, your opinion is going to be listened to, because it's an incredibly flat structure in this business. So you will be heard. Your ideas are critical. And here's a way, if we're going to do things faster than has ever been done before, you're going to see your ideas on orbit. And that's incredibly personally satisfying to an engineer, to think, you know what, that is my idea, and it's on orbit before I retire. And on a financial level, getting people to embrace risk, well, you don't just pay a flat salary, you give them a chunk of the business. So I think it's really important to have decent share schemes, these decent share option schemes, to incentivize people that, you've got your lottery ticket, we're in this together. If we turn this into a really valuable business, then on top of a good salary, you're going to get those shares, which should be worth a lot of money if we get this right.
Okay, wow. And just a note to our audience, if you have any questions for Mike, let us know in the comments below, whether you're tuning in on YouTube or Facebook, and hopefully we can ask your questions to Mike. And when you were starting OSS, and it was you and I think a few other people co-founding it, and you could see people slowly starting to become interested. You were going through the phase of, okay, I need a team now. How was that phase of putting a team together?
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough because, once again, you don't have a lot of money. You don't have an absolute clear business plan of where this is going to be in 5 years. By the very nature of being startup, it's a pretty scrappy existence, and you have to pivot quickly. As you saw in some of those intro videos, we started developing our flexible composite material, and actually at one point we convinced ourselves that, hey, the future is going to be things like deployable boom systems, which could then underpin deployable solar panels. But very quickly it turned into, actually, antennas. Deployable antennas is where the real money is going to be, and where the market actually wants us to develop technology. So it's a case of, actually, what do we know about RF engineering? What do we know about antennas? Well, kind of very little. So we now need to go and find that talent. So the ability to kind of pivot with the team quickly, be honest, we lack the skills in this very small team that we put together. Now, how do we go and attract other people with the skills we need to build this team? So there's a certain mentality, I think, in people wanting to join a startup, which is different from the mentality of people wanting to join a business, perhaps in kind of year 4 or year 5. And you do need that blend, or the appetite for risk. Having everybody wanting to kind of smash the lights out and change the world perhaps isn't what you want in a more operational business, where you do want the people that want to come in and have a more stable environment. But you never want to lose that entrepreneurial energy, that desire to take risk, because that drives innovation in the business. So that blend of skills is really important. But you've got to be attracting the right talent at the right time to the business.
Do you think that's more of a personality thing when you say people who are joining OSS in its first couple of years? Do you think it's a certain personality of a person that they take on that risk, rather than join a company which is slightly more well established?
Yeah, and I think it comes from perhaps engineers. I think there's 2 types of people that join a startup. You've got guys kind of straight out of college, and kind of, what have you got to lose? There's no mortgage to pay. You haven't generally got a wife and kind of 3 kids that you got to look after. So your appetite or your ability to take risk is a lot greater than perhaps more mature people with a family. So actually getting very young talent to come to a startup is pretty easy to do. But of course, you actually need a good blend. You want some really experienced engineers who have been there, got the scars of getting technology wrong, to provide that foundation. And it's those sorts of people that become much harder to attract. So the way I did it actually was appealing to those engineers that perhaps were feeling a little bit frustrated in their current positions, because generally with space, especially if you're working on a science mission, that could be 15, even 20 years before you see your technology on orbit. So appealing to the nature of engineers that actually were a bit frustrated, things were taking too long in the traditional setup, will come and work at OSS, and we're going to do things a hell of a lot quicker, and you will see your ideas on orbit. And oh, by the way, we're an incredibly small team, so you will be influential, you will be listened to, and we'll get your tech on orbit. And that can be really compelling to more mature engineers as well.
Yeah, just a quick one. And how did you go about finding these frustrated people in the industry?
Well, yeah, LinkedIn is great. I've got a phone book, and kind of 6 degrees of separation. Who knows a good RF engineer? Well, yeah, John probably knows somebody. Why don't you give John a call? So literally, it was just building on the network. And I'm really proud to say, in the first, I think, 4 years, maybe even 5 years of OSS, we never used a recruitment agency. It literally was by introductions and networking. And the great thing about Harwell campus was it was kind of right place, right time. I think OSS was space business number 4 or 5 on campus, and now it's well over 100. So there's lots of campus promotion events where I could stand up in front of an audience, talk about the vision, the great things we want to do. And literally every time I came off stage, someone would say, "Hey, can I come and work for you?" Or, my husband or my wife is really looking to, for a more fulfilling role, and we're really up for joining a startup. Would you have a conversation? So yeah, that's how I did it for the first 4 years.
That's so interesting, because you normally hear stories about startups, and it's so fascinating today that I'm actually getting to speak to someone who's been at the heart of one over the past 7-8 years.
The one story that sticks in my own mind about recruitment, I was fortunate enough to present at a space event in Tokyo in I think it's the 3rd year of the business. And I played the videos that we just played today, actually, that first technology being deployed on orbit. And this really enthusiastic Japanese chap came running up to me afterwards, and in pretty good English, he said, "I really want to come and work for you. I really want to come and work." And I'm like, well, that's great, but kind of, who are you? He said, "Oh, I'm Dr. Yoshiro Ogi. I've been working at JAXA, Japanese aerospace agency, the equivalent of NASA in Japan. I'm now currently teaching structural engineering for space at a university. but I'm really frustrated. I really want to see my ideas on orbit, and that's never going to happen in academia. So I want to come and work for you. And so long story short, he moved to the UK, brought his entire family over, and has been with the business ever since. And yes, we have flown his ideas on orbit.
That's great. That's great. Well, congratulations to him for making that bold career choice.
Yeah.
We've actually got a question in from the audience from Jamie Robb. Hey, Jamie, thank you for joining us. How do you see the sector changing as it becomes more and more private?
Well, private means commercial, which means any private business needs to stand up on its own 2 feet financially, which means it has to be a sustainable business. It needs to be generating revenue. And I think we're going to see technology move increasingly quickly if it's financially based, because the market forces will take over. Who's first to market with the new technology, who can develop new services to lock in those customers. So I think we're entering a really exciting phase in commercial space. It's going to get a lot quicker. And space is not immune from market forces. We will expect to see casualties. Companies will fail in exactly the same way terrestrial companies come and go. I think it's going to be really, really exciting. We're now seeing a huge amount of private money investors have very much warmed up to the space sector. And of course, they're chasing the next investment opportunity. And for startups and scale-up businesses, this is fantastic because cash is the fuel for growing any business. So to have investors wanting to come into the space sector is absolutely critical to drive that growth.
Yeah, you talk about how the cash is an incredibly important part of it. Do you think OSS would have got to where it got to so quickly without the investment? And how important do you think investment is for young entrepreneurs out there who have an amazing idea but either can't find the investment or don't know how to find the investment?
So the first question, that's an easy question to answer. Absolutely not. OSS would not be where it was if it had not received the significant investment it has done.
Even though, sorry to interrupt, even though it had these amazing ideas.
Yeah, because how do you develop those ideas? Developing any new technology costs real money. You need real talent, which means you've got to pay real wages. You need the equipment to do that. That costs money. You've got to test anything you develop, so you need appropriate qualified test facilities. And that's one of the reasons we were at Harwell. But you're renting a thermal vacuum chamber to simulate space. That's £1,000 a day. To book a session on a vibration table to simulate launch forces, well, there's another few £1,000s. So it's very easy to spend a few £100,000 just designing and testing even a small piece of equipment. So very quickly you can rack up a pretty big bill. And of course, you've got to prove all this before you can sell anything. So the only certainty is in the early days of developing space hardware, all the money's going out the door, it's not coming in. So the only way you're going to do that is be lucky enough to raise significant external investment, or you go the alternative route, which is being a part-time consultancy. So you do jobbing design work for other companies to generate the revenue and then grow that way. But that is a very, very slow, organic way of growing a business. And you end up being kind of eternally frustrated because you want to be working flat out on your technology. Yeah. Because as we said, commercial space, it's a race to market. So you want your technology to market before your competitors. But if you've got to fund the business yourself, you've got that distraction of earning money to keep the lights on, keep yourself fed by doing a bit of consultancy work.
Was there ever a time in the early stages of OSS that you felt like we might not survive?
Yeah. Yeah, you know what? I think until you're fully a sustainable business, and I think that focuses the mind. You don't work if you're the founder, you don't actually work in the business. It is your life. It literally takes over. There's no such thing as time off. My wife still jokes. She says, we don't actually go on holiday. I just take you to another location to work. It's just warmer and sunnier. And she says, you never switch off. I know your brain is constantly running. But it's the nature of the beast. But if it's your own baby and it's your own vision, it doesn't feel like work. Yeah, it's really tiring and draining, and it is work, but it doesn't feel like work because it's your vision, and it's really motivating when you've got people not risking their careers but changing their careers to come and support you in that vision. We only live once. Life is precious. So for people to say, you know what, I ain't going to spend X years of my life with OSS, with Mike, developing these ideas. That's a phenomenal privilege to have. Therefore, that motivates you massively.
Yeah, I think people who are watching, who run their own businesses, who are entrepreneurs or students who want to be entrepreneurs, I think they'll really resonate with the fact that it doesn't feel like work. But
Yeah.
then I have a question for you. OSS was your kind of brainchild in 2013. So for those of you watching, Mike's not actually with OSS anymore. So why did you leave this thing you've spent so many years dedicating your life to? How come you left?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it comes down to some of the challenges we see in the UK and Europe in the way businesses are funded with venture capital. Okay. So VCs, venture capital, tends to have a relatively short time horizon. They need to invest and they need to get out of their investments. They need to return to their investors, because it's not their money, it's other investors' money coming in, and they just manage it. So most investment funds have a 10-year time horizon. So within 10 years, they need to return a multiple back to the fund. And it's true, most VCs expect a 10x return on their money. So for every pound they've put into Oxford Space Systems, they expect at least 10 pounds back out within that time frame. So kind of no pressure. But I'm very much the kind of the maverick entrepreneur. I think we're only just getting going at OSS. There's so much more to be done to really increase the value of that business. But that doesn't directly align where the investors want to go with the business. They understandably want to see a much more operational business, such that it prepares itself ultimately perhaps for a trade sale or even a flotation. And that requires a different type of mindset, a different type of CEO. So I agreed to stand down from the business just over a year ago, because I am the maverick entrepreneur. I'm the guy coming with the ideas to conquer the world. So we installed a more operational focused CEO to take the business in the way it's demanded by the investors. So there's been no massive falling out. I'm still the largest private shareholder in the business I founded. I still support the business on a bit of ad hoc consultancy and strategy work, but it's freed me up to go and do what I do best, which is kind of spot the next opportunity and build the team. So I'm on to tech business number 4 now, and I'll do it all again.
Speaking of what you're on to now is another company called Oxford Dynamics. Do you want to tell everyone a little bit about what Oxford Dynamics is doing?
Yeah, I'll give you a little sneak preview behind the curtain, although I'm not going kind of completely full disclosure yet. The website is actually quite vague, but what we're doing is working on both terrestrial technologies as well as space technologies. The terrestrial technology is to do with drones. We've spotted an opportunity, a market gap in drone technology. We've actually secured funding from an area of the MOD, which is interested in the idea. So I'm in the privileged position of having all my R&D 100% funded by a certain section of the government, because they find the technology very interesting, which is a great way to start a business from day one. And that is providing the funding for us to internally develop some novel ideas to do with the protection of satellites on orbit from things like space debris, as well as nefarious interference, shall we say. I will say no more.
That sounds really interesting. We'll leave it at that for Oxford Dynamics.
We'll be able to break cover probably in six to 9 months, but exactly kind of what we're doing in that area.
Awesome. I think everyone's going to be looking forward to that. We've got another question in from the audience. Jay Smith. Hey, Jay. Thank you for joining us. And Jay's asking, has the vision of OSS always been the same from the start, or have you been forced to pivot on your business model in order to appease investors?
That's a great question. The technology has certainly pivoted. As I said, we started life kind of focusing on this kind of novel boom technology that we showed in the video. And the idea was to essentially revolutionize how solar panels could be deployed on orbit, as well as other kind of panel-like structures. But as I said earlier, it became clear that the real value lay in deployable space antennas. So there's a kind of a tech pivot. So we repositioned the company not purely as a deployable structures company, but as a deployable antennas company and structures. So we kind of had that pivot focus shift in the technology. In terms of the vision for the business, no, I think that is still, that remained unchanged. What I wanted to do was make OSS a recognized world leader in novel deployable antennas and structures, and become the go-to company for CubeSats and microsat and antennas. Because the market, the reason I started the business was there was only really two large incumbents supplying antennas and other structures to the industry, both based out of the US, both very much tied up in US defense projects. So you have these large behemoths of companies that I worked out could not move quick enough or hit the commercial price point for new space. The idea of building these very small satellites that didn't just want one or two antennas, we're talking about constellations. So I couldn't see any company out there structuring itself to be in a position to make, say, 100 antennas and hit those commercial price points. So that was kind of the niche I spotted, and that was the vision, to become that go-to volume producer of commercial space products and free of US Department of Defense restrictions.
Yeah.
So the vision is there.
Do you think it helped that you were not originally part of the space industry and you were kind of looking from the outside in?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think the answer is yeah. You know, I was naive enough to think I could do it rather than listening to the experts. Although within the first year, actually, I had a chance meeting with what turned out to be our largest US competitor, but I didn't really realize that at the time. One of the large US antenna companies kind of looked at me. It was actually at Harwell. They were on a visit to Harwell in the UK. And the guy said to me, he said, you don't stand a chance against us. You should just kind of switch off the lights and go home. We're going to crush you. And I looked at him and said, look, for you to actually say that shows that you're worried about what I'm doing, because you won't bother saying that. You would just get on and do it. So you're sending the warning signs, because I think you feel threatened, because I don't see how you can make antennas at the price point that we're going to make them at. And you certainly can't make them in the volumes that are needed by the industry, because that's not how you're set up. You're systemically unable, structurally unable to do that. So I think you're nervous of us. And about 3 years after that meeting, I met the guy again when I was in the US, and he smiled. He said, "I'd never forgot what you said to me." And he said, "You know what? If I was 20 years younger, I'd come and work now at OSS." And I thought, that's great validation. Great validation. Yeah. So yeah, I didn't listen to the experts, because they would have told me not to bother.
Awesome. That's so great. That's such an inspiring story of a space entrepreneur going through that phase.
It's a balance, because you need expertise in knowledge, because I need technical expertise, but you also need to be open-minded to challenge the status quo, to do things a little bit differently. And it's one hell of a delicate balance you've got to get right. So I guess people say, was it skill or was it luck? And I think it's a blend of both. You've got to have the skill, but my gosh, you've got to be lucky. But the harder you work, the luckier you get, don't you?
What would you say was your hardest phase throughout the process of building OSS?
It was getting the investment, that kind of raising the first couple of million, because it was still incredibly high risk technology. We hadn't really, we hadn't flown anything on orbit at that time, so we still were very much an aspirational business. And raising money is almost a full-time job in itself. So I would say the first 2.5 years were probably, definitely the hardest slog. Raising the money was the toughest task. And what's interesting is once you've demonstrated something working on orbit, it kind of flips the other way. We then ended up being in the really privileged position of investors seeking out the business. So it went from people not wanting to invest to us being in the very privileged position of turning investment away because we were oversubscribed. We didn't want to take any more money in because that meant dilution of shares. So it was a really interesting flip to see in the market. So saying no to VCs is a really satisfying thing to be able to do.
Wow. Yeah, I'm sure it is. Yeah. What would you say is your best trait as a tech entrepreneur that has really helped you?
Well, people tend to say to me, I can be quite a infectious personality. If you come and kind of sit with me for half an hour, I tend to get people quite infused about the technology we're working on. So I think it's that kind of the outward facing CEO is kind of my best quality, getting people excited about the technology and being able to articulate complex technical things to a lay audience. So I avoid jargon wherever I can. And I think that's what it is, showing real enthusiasm about the technology I want to develop. And hopefully that's infectious and rubs off and people want to come and work.
No, it definitely is. It definitely is. And let's flip the question then. What about your biggest weakness that may have led to a mistake potentially?
Oh, my biggest weakness. Oh, I'm terrible at detail. I'm a great starter, but I'm really bad at finishing things. So I need to backfill whatever I do with people that actually enjoy finishing things. So yeah, that's my eternal weakness. I'm really quite bad at finishing things.
Wow, okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. Let's talk a little bit more about the future of space and tech entrepreneurship.
Yep.
You say that you're really passionate about kind of inspiring the next generation of tech and space entrepreneurs, especially kind of to do with engineering and science entrepreneurship. What's your definition of a good space or tech entrepreneur?
You've got to have vision. You've got to see an opportunity that perhaps others haven't spotted and really believe in it. And if it is new technology, what you're trying to do is predict where the market's going to be in maybe 3, 4, 5 years' time, because it can take that long to get technology on orbit. So that ability to have a vision that far out is critical. Obviously, you need tenacity. You've got to hang in there because you will meet a lot of people that say it won't happen, it can't be done, a lot of naysayers. And yeah, you've got to have the ability to attract people to want to come and work for you or with you, and the ability to convince customers and investors to put their money with you, especially the investment community. You're in competition with everybody else that wants a slice of their money, and investors invest in money-making machines. So the job of an entrepreneur is to convince an investor they've got the best money-making machine they've seen. So understanding how the investment community works, I think, is a key skill for any tech entrepreneur as well. What I quite often see being made as a mistake with other budding tech entrepreneurs is, and I used to do it, you talk about that which you are most comfortable with and confident with. So you end up talking about the technology, not articulating to an investor the business case and why this makes sense financially. So in my later pitches, I was just talking about the opportunity and why this made sense financially as a technology. And on one occasion, an investor said, "Yeah, this is really great, but what is the technology?" Oh, you want to talk technology? Sorry, I thought you wanted to talk how it's going to make you richer. But yeah, let's do a deep dive on the tech. Let me talk about high strain composites, and beta cloth and thermal ratios and things. Yeah, we can do that if you want to, but I didn't think you wanted a technical talk.
Wow. But you do have the spectrum of investors, don't you? Where you have, I think, majority of them who are interested in the money making machines, as you say, but you also have the other end of the spectrum who are actually kind of interested in knowing what you're going to be doing with their money.
Yeah. No, you're right. Yeah, I mean, there's no such thing as a one size fits all investor. At one end of the extreme, you do have those investors that all they're interested in is show me the Excel spreadsheet and let's work through the gross margins. And it's just purely a financial model. And they really aren't that interested in the tech. And they tend to be investors in more mature operational type businesses. And then right at the other end, one of my favorite investors in OSS is in fact the Institute of Mechanical Engineers. They have an investment fund called the Stevenson Fund. And believe it or not, that fund isn't about making money from its investments, which sounds bizarre. Its rationale is to encourage and stimulate engineering in the UK. So if they can be part of growing a company, then that becomes a great case study example to encourage other people to take up mechanical engineering and build the engineering base of the UK. So that's a great example of in fact, you're not a greedy investor, and they're incredibly patient. It's what we call an evergreen fund. They don't actually need to exit along the normal time horizon that other funds do. And then you get another type of investor, what we call business angels or high net worth individuals. And one of the most exciting and interesting phone calls I ever had, I was on the way to present at a conference in London. My phone rang. A guy said, look, are you coming to this conference? And I went, yeah, kind of, who is this? He said, well, this is so-and-so. You're late to the conference. And I said, yeah, I'm really sorry about that. You know, my train was delayed, but I am coming. Kind of, but why? What's the urgency? I'm not presenting till three hours time. And he said, oh, yeah, he said, I'm a business angel and I'm really interested in investing in your company. And I was hoping to meet you so we could talk about investing. And I thought business angel probably going to be 20, 30, 40K. And he said, look, I know you're very busy, so I'll just cut to the chase. I've made quite a bit of money as a city trader, but I've always been a space geek, always been fascinated with space. And I really like what you've done with OSS. So I'd like to start with an investment of $500,000, if that's okay. And once again, you're not a greedy investor, very, very patient, and just fascinated with the technology. So tell me about the technology. Tell me why this is exciting. Tell me how we're going to change the world. So it's a complete spectrum of investors. I think it's great to have a balance if you're fortunate enough to do that, because they keep each other in check then.
That's incredibly fascinating, and it's lovely to hear your stories of going through your entrepreneurial journey. And I'm sure we'll have people listening to this talk after it goes onto our YouTube channel, and we'll have students listening in who are maybe towards the end of their teenage years, and we'll have university students, and we'll also have young engineers who maybe have graduated and might be looking for a job or are in the first, like I'd say, 5 years of their first job. And for those of them who have an entrepreneurial spirit and feel like they need to do something entrepreneurial minded, what advice would you have for them in order to become a good entrepreneur, maybe future in their careers?
Yeah, that's a great question. It starts with an idea, and it's easy to convince yourself that you've got a brilliant idea, and we all suffer from confirmation bias. You know, we tend to seek out that information to confirm what we believe rather than critically challenge what we believe. So I would say to any budding young entrepreneur, be intellectually honest. Yeah, great. It's easy to find the information that kind of supports your position, but go and find that information that could challenge you. Does the market genuinely exist? What does that competitor landscape look like? You know, the internet's a wonderful thing. Who else is out there operating in your area? or operating in the space that you want to get into. And the world is functioning perfectly well without your idea at the moment. So who's going to buy your idea, your technology, and why? Why are people going to change their behavior and pick your solution over all their other options, including the option of doing nothing? So if you can honestly answer those questions, why people are going to change their behavior or change where they spend their money, then you're on a really, really good trajectory. And you don't need to have all those answers, but you have enough to look yourself in the mirror and say, you know what, I'm not fooling myself. I genuinely think this is worth a shot. That's kind of foundation 101 question to sort out.
Yeah, and maybe what about for those young budding entrepreneurs who might not have an idea at this current moment of time, and they acknowledge the fact that right now I don't have an idea, which might be the case. What skill set do you think they should focus on?
If you're a budding entrepreneur, of course it depends kind of in which sector, but we're talking about space. So if you've got a strong technical degree, that's a great place to start, because you're always going to be useful and you can develop your own technology. It doesn't mean you have to go and convince other expensive engineers to come and work for you or with you to start with. That's a great position. But of course, there's other types of degrees as well. Space isn't just about being technically geeky. If you're studying finance, for instance, this industry is going through a commercial revolution, coming up with new business models, new methods of financing the businesses. That in itself is an entrepreneurial skill, which can be incredibly valuable. And I've seen actually financial entrepreneurs coming into the sector, working out how they can finance various startups or mid-size and scale-up businesses. So there's financial entrepreneurship. We need project managers. We've got to publicize this industry. So this industry is this fantastic place that it's ripe for disruption as we move away from the old mindset of very large incumbents taking a long time to make really big, expensive satellites into much, much faster pace companies making much smaller satellites in much higher volumes. And that's a completely different mindset. So it's ripe for having these opportunities spotted. And if you don't yet have the idea, but you have entrepreneurial leanings, well, go and work for a startup. Go and expose yourself to the environment. Get to understand why the company does what it does. And invariably, you'll meet other people and you will have sparky conversations. Probably in the first year of working for somebody else, you'll probably come up with that killer idea and go and start your own business. And OSS, for instance, of course, through the course of the first, I think, 4 years, 5 years there, 3 people left to go and start their own space businesses. Wow. So I was really, really pleased that in that sense, OSS itself gave rise to another 3 space businesses.
Wow, okay, that's incredibly interesting. Did you always know growing up you wanted to be an entrepreneur and you wanted to build your own companies, I should say?
I've always been a kind of tech nerd, so I was always getting in trouble for playing with technology. So I remember when we got a brand new color TV, the first thing I did was take the back off it. My parents weren't in the room. I was just fascinated how the colors were formed. I managed to electrocute myself quite badly. So that was not a great move. So I learned the power of electricity by doing that. And I remember going to my grandparents, and they had an old upright piano. And I got in horrendous trouble because I took the back off the piano. I wanted to see how the noise was made. When I was bought toys at Christmas, I just took them apart. I wanted to know what was inside. So I've always been kind of a tech fiddler, wanting to know what's under the hood. And I realized that I was perhaps better as an entrepreneur than working at other companies, because I would always get frustrated when I was working for other people. And I'm on to company number 4, so I've been an entrepreneur now for 20 years. And my wife actually said to me, you have to be an entrepreneur because you're unemployable. You drive other people mad because they won't move fast enough for you or won't be visionary enough for you. So yeah, you're unemployable. You've got to do this because that's the only thing you can do now. I think that was mean, but yeah.
Great. Yeah. Well, I wish you the best of luck with Oxford Dynamics. But what else? What after Oxford Dynamics, and what else does the future hold? Do you have any other ideas that you've scribbled down on a notepad and say maybe this could work in 10, 15 years time?
Yes,
Or more,
is the short answer.
maybe earlier.
Yes is the short answer. There's a couple of ideas that don't fit within Oxford Dynamics' remit, and there is another company being formed that I'm putting those ideas into, and they've already secured some funding, and they are commercial products, and I'll be able to talk about those probably in about 6 months' time. So I guess I can't stop myself. So it's not just Oxford Dynamics. There's another little company that's coming along, which is doing very well. Yeah,
Awesome.
but ultimately, what do I want to do? You know, I've learned a lot. I bear a lot of scars from getting it right and getting it wrong, and so it's good to be able to share those experiences. So perhaps ending up being more of a mentor, maybe being a chairman of a number of startups, and just trying to guide the next generation of entrepreneurs to build on what I've done. I've been pretty successful, but if I can help someone stand on my shoulders and become the next SpaceX in the UK or the next Google, then that'll be a fantastic epitaph, I think.
Great. Well, we can't wait to have you back on in 6 months' time and talk about your next startup.
Yes, yeah, I'm hoping we're going to change the world in another direction. I can talk about it in about 6 months' time.
Great. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you, Mike. I've learned so much about entrepreneurship, and I hope everyone else who has tuned in tonight on YouTube and Facebook on Space Tour Live has learned something from Mike's entrepreneurial journey with Oxford Space Systems. If you guys want to learn more about Oxford Space Systems, head over to our Space Store partnerships page, and you can learn about Oxford Space Systems and all of our other space partners, and also visit their websites and buy their cool merchandise. Ground-based space, thank you once again for joining us on Space Tour Live. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. Mike, thank you so much for coming onto the show. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yes, great. Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, and look forward to coming back at some future point to talk about more entrepreneurship.
Definitely, yeah. We can't wait to have you back on again. Just a quick announcement from me. If you didn't tune into our talk with an astronaut last week, you can still go ahead and watch it on our YouTube channel. But next week, we've got another Meet an Astronaut for you. I don't think we've even spoken about this on our social media channels yet, but we have former NASA astronaut Colonel Terry Virts on Space Tour Live next week, Thursday at 7 p.m. So tune in then for meeting another astronaut on Space Tour Live. Until then, take care, stay safe, and we'll see you again shortly. Once again, Mike, thank you for coming on. I hope you have a great day, a great evening,
Thank you.
and take care.
Great, thank you.